Welcome to Think Free with Stephen
and Daniel.
Two brothers breaking down ideas and ways of thinking about this thing we call life. Unlock your mind to explore more than you ever thought possible. Think Free. Did you look up the word epistemology at all?
Just real brief. I didn't have much time.
Okay. Had you heard it before I sent it to you?
I had, yes.
Okay. Would you want to take a stab at what it means to you or the definition or how you'd explain it?
Well, I'm looking at it right now.
Okay. Let's take a stab at what your phone says.
Yeah. The theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its methods, validity, and scope.
Perfect. Yeah, that sums it up.
Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion.
What more do we need to say on the topic? That's sums it up.
Until next time.
Until then, exactly. Yeah, the difference. What I hear in that is the difference between opinion and truth, or how do we know what we know, is another common way to say it. Mm-hmm. And our discussions, I think, often are looking at ways to parse out the difference between opinion and truth, or what is truth, or how do we know what we know in a sense of events that happened. And definitely one of the themes of Thinking Free is to at least be aware of those ways of thinking. And I think it's also relevant because different people approach how they know what they know from different angles and have different perspectives on what they would decide is true, and how they come to the conclusion that something is true is probably the best way to say that, which I think we all experience in our day-to-day lives when we're interacting with people that we disagree with or that have a different worldview than us. It's just we don't always have language like this to describe it. So epistemology has been for a long time. I think it's the attempt to try to give language to you say you know something this way and I know something from this way, and here's where we're different, or here's where we're aligned, or something like that.
Yeah. Have you done much studying in your past, not just for this pod, but for in your past as far as epistemology at all?
Well, yeah, part of what made me think about this as a topic was I'd heard a speech on it, or a lecture, maybe is a better word, a lecture on it from a good friend of mine, Jeff R. Shout out to Jeff R. And he shared this last summer with a group of us and took some notes, and it really helped kind of expand my experience with it, or ways of understanding myself. And my wife was part of that as well. And so we've been going back and forth at times over the last year. It helps us to say, all right, you think that's true, I think this is true, and here's why, or how we came to those conclusions, using some of the language of epistemology.
Okay.
So a lot like personality type or Enneagram number or any other ways that we might differ from somebody else in how we see the world. A person's epistemology can impact their uniqueness, and it can impact my uniqueness. And so
would you say it can impact like the story that you tell yourself?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yeah.
Okay.
Or how you come to the story that you come to.
Yeah.
Or what makes a story believable to you versus another story wouldn't be very believable because of the framework, the filter through which your epistemology operates, which will make more sense once I share some of those with you.
Okay.
So epistemology classically has been defined as having basically two approaches, and more recently a third approach was added. So more of a classic stance, the two divisions of epistemology, or the two ways that people could approach knowledge, was to either use reason and logic, or empiricism, or the scientific method. So you could know something is true because it makes sense logically, or you can know something is true because you've applied the scientific method, which they call empiricism. An oversimplified distinction between those two would be to say reason is what's something that's self-evident in the way that it's stated or the way that it's described or explained. And they call that an a priori definition. And so a classic example is that all husbands are married. If you make that statement, you're appealing to reason. You're appealing to an a priori argument. And it's because the word husband is defined as somebody who's married, a married man.
Okay.
To say all husbands are married is self-evident. You don't need to do scientific research. You don't need to poll husbands to say, hey, are you married? Are you married? Are you married? So the proof of the statement is in the statement itself and the definition of the words as we can understand them. So that would be appealing to reason. The empiricism one would be more like a statement that says all Teslas are black. And the definition of the word Tesla doesn't include a color. It's just a type of vehicle. And so in order to prove that statement, you'd have to go out and look at every single Tesla and see if it's indeed black. And so there's the term for that is instead of a priori statement, it's an a posteriori statement. Easy to say.
Yeah.
It's Latin.
Okay.
And it means it's not self-evident. It requires investigation to determine if that's true or not.
Okay. Can you use those examples not when you're looking at nouns, but like actions, like that when we sacrifice a virgin, it rains?
Some sort to make a connection.
Like, can then you use those two examples to then work through which one that is?
Yeah. So I think in that case, you'd have to probably use an all statement. So you'd say every time we sacrifice a virgin, it rains.
Yes. And which one would that be of those two that you were just saying?
That would be the a posteriori, the empiricism.
Okay.
You'd have to conduct experiments.
Oh, okay.
To sacrifice a virgin every time it rains.
To verify.
It, right.
Yeah. Because, whereas the other one, you don't have to really verify it. It's just known by how you're describing it, basically.
Right. It's considered self-evident in the phrase.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Based on the definitions of the other words that are being used. It's interdependent. You don't need any external validation to prove it to be true. Sometimes where, disagreement or arguments take place when talking about things with people is even agreeing on whether something is an a priori or an a posteriori statement. So God created the heavens and the earth is to a believer is an a priori statement because by definition, God is the creator. So by saying God created the heavens and the earth, you're making a self-inclusive statement that doesn't require an external validation because by how you define God is that they are the creator. He is the creator. So therefore that statement doesn't need any verification. It doesn't need any validation. You don't have to do any empirical studies to determine whether it's true or not. It's self-evident by the way it's stated because you believe that's the definition of God. So somebody that's a believer would say that's an a priori statement. Somebody else who's not a believer would say, no, it's not.
Okay. Yeah.
And so at the very onset of that statement being made, you have irreconcilable differences between the two people in the conversation. And you can use that for any kind of a social situation or debate. You could use it for political debates.
Yeah, like Gaza, like we were talking about last week.
That's right. Yeah. Your position on that to say life begins at conception for a pro-life or anti-abortion advocate would be an a priori statement. But for those who don't have that same conviction or belief, they would say, prove it. You don't have empirical evidence for it. So you can't make that statement. And again, the two people just kind of starting off on opposite planes. And then any further discussion is going to be unfruitful at best. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that's pretty empirical.
Pretty opposite a priori statement in and of itself. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So those are kind of the two classical distinctions under epistemology. You've sort of got that as a head, and then the two are reason/logic and empiricism. And a third one has been added more recently, which is existentialism, or maybe experientialism would be a little bit more accurate way of saying it, that kind of goes alongside those two, which says I know something is true because I've experienced it, because I've lived it, or because my past experience has taught me that this is true. I don't have to appeal to empirical data. I don't have to appeal to reason or logic. I just know that it's true because it's in my gut, because it's intuitive because, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of a situation.
Okay.
And so that's become that's not so much in the classical definition, but it's more recent third way of expanding epistemology.
Okay. Would you say that can you have that along with one of the other two? Like you think about the God example you just gave just a minute ago. Could someone say God is the creator of the universe because I feel it in my soul, my experiences?
Absolutely, and that's a great insight into where this topic goes from a more modern standpoint. In the discussion that I was telling you that I listened to from my buddy Jeff was to take those three and put them into groupings to help us understand how we have an expanded approach to epistemology in the modern age. And so again, kind of like Enneagram numbers or personality types, this particular talk consisted of 4 definitions that most people would fall into. And most people will use all 4 of these positions in the way that they interpret truth or knowledge. It's just they're going to rank them according to individual preferences or upbringing or who knows, nature versus nurture. But the helpful part of it is to realize that you and I might appreciate all 4 of these approaches, but weigh them differently. So for me, I might put one at the top and another at the bottom, and you might do the inverse of these 4 approaches.
But you haven't said the 4th one yet, right?
There isn't a 4th one. It's not reason.
Oh, 4 is all of them together?
There's 4. There's 4 separate ones that include the 3 that I mentioned already.
Oh, okay.
So let me jump into that real quick and it'll make more sense. Because I know I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse here a little bit. So let's set reason, empiricism, and existentialism aside for a moment and say those were the classical ways that people broke down epistemology.
Okay.
And we're going to say the more modern approach, or the one that I wanted to share from my friend, borrows from those, but it also creates a separate 4 categories.
Okay.
So in no particular order, the first one could be called authoritarianism. And this would mean that a person would give, if this was the person's first way to appeal for the verification of knowledge or truth, that they would lean heavily on tradition and holy text or scripture or written documents, things from the past that they would say this is true because our ancestors wrote it down and believed it, and because it's traditionally held that this is the way things are.
Okay.
And so you could see this in a fundamentalist religious person who would appeal to their holy text, to their scripture, to the way that's always been done in their religion for 6,000, 2,000, however many thousands of years. And so we know this to be true, most importantly, because of our written text and because of the tradition.
Okay. Yeah.
Above
that has the
everything else.
authority.
That's the authoritarianism. It's not authoritarianism like a dictator or politically. So we're using that term much more in a way to describe how a person arrives at truth or how a person values or weighs something. So that would be one of them. And again, no particular order here. The next one would be innateism. And this one also has 2 components. So the first one was scripture and tradition. The second one, innateism, borrows from the previous conversation we had, and it uses reason and experience combined. So innateism would be a person relies on their own reason and their experience to come up with what is true and what is not true. So if something makes sense to me logically, and it fits with my experience, it's going to get a lot better chance of me deeming it to be true. Based on those solely, if that's my top way of interpreting truth. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. Yep. I'm following you.
Okay. So the next one is similar. This would be intuition, or being an intuitionist would be, instead of reason and experience, you have mysticism and experience. So it's similar, but it's slightly different. You rely on your experience, but instead of appealing to reason, you appeal to mysticism to verify or help solidify something that you would define as true.
Okay. So could you example of that, like astrology?
Yeah, that could be a simplified way of thinking about it. Astrology, spiritualism.
I'm a simple kind of guy. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, astrology.
I'm just thinking because like people could relate to it. They could have the experiences. Right. It's kind of mystical. There's not like a religious text and
That's
like
right.
the authoritative one.
Yes, exactly. I'm spiritual, not religious type of a thing. Yeah, 100%. So astrology, ancestor worship, talking to or communicating with spirits in some form or fashion, or even what we commonly think of as the Native American tradition.
Okay.
As far as we know, being a white guy, there isn't as much of an appeal to written texts.
Yeah.
It's the ancestors, it's the trees, it's the land, it's the those sorts of things would fit into that mysticism category.
Okay.
And then experience with that kind of tied together. And then the last one uses the same word, empiricism, as we talked about. And this is maybe kind of the most, the one that blends the two originals, which is reason and the scientific method, are the two pillars of that approach. It doesn't pass the reason test and it doesn't pass the scientific method test, then it's not true. I don't care if you tell me that your ancestors have worshipped at this tree for thousands of years. If I can't verify it with one of those two methods, to me, it's not true. That would be a way of, coming at life from the empiricism standpoint. So,
okay.
Should I run through them one more time?
Yeah, real quick.
Okay, real quick. So authoritarianism appeals to scripture and tradition. Innatism appeals to reason and experience. Intuitionism, experience and mysticism. And empiricism is reason and the scientific method.
And the second one was reason and experiences. Okay. And then the last one is reason and scientific
method. Yeah.
Okay.
So you don't really care as much about what your past experience is. You want to test it and get evidence for it.
Okay. And what would you classify the reason? Like how could you explain the reason portion of that fourth one?
Same as in the innatism one. It's using logic and does it just make sense?
Okay. Without any scientific evidence or proof,
right?
Does it just make sense? Okay.
Does it seem like an a priori statement to me?
Okay.
My definition of reason. Whereas authoritarianism and intuitionism don't use reason in that way. It's not that they don't think reason is important. It's just those aren't the top. And so again, all of us could say at some point in our lives we've probably relied on one of these or in some fashion. Like you can stack them basically is what I'm trying to say. It's not like every person is just one or the other. The question is more of what's your top way of approaching the question of is this true?
Okay.
Which one do you kind of default to? And then if you can't use that one for whatever reason or it doesn't feel sufficient, then you'll probably look at what's your number two on the list of priorities. And in rare cases, you might appeal to a third or a fourth one to find truth or to decide if something is true.
Okay.
So it's not so much a question of which of these am I or which of these am I not. It's just the stacking or how do I prioritize these in my life? And then when you interact with somebody else that has a different stacking, that can also often explain disagreements or how we tell each other ourselves different stories.
Right. Yeah. Because if you have, you're the fourth one. What's that one called?
Empiricism, reason and the scientific method.
You're there and you can't get behind somebody else's statement or belief or theory, and they're just using their experiences and mysticism. Then could very easily go down the rabbit hole of talking about a conversation that you kind of need to back up from, because you're not going to get any of that resolved before you kind of first understand where you're both coming from these aspects.
Absolutely. And we could take these, to the extreme and kind of think of maybe an archetype type of person for each of these. And so the authoritarianism would be like I said, you're a religious fundamentalist, or maybe even a member of the clergy in a particular faith tradition, Eastern or Western, that, only truth comes from the way we've done things forever and what our holy text says.
Or maybe even like a constitutionalist. like thinking not just religion, but like politics, politically.
Right. Yeah, and then you would appeal to not just the written documents, but what did the founding fathers mean?
Right.
That would be the tradition.
Yeah.
We've always done it this way. Our elections have always gone this way. Our courts have always ruled this way. We've always legislated this way. So why should we change it? We shouldn't change it. It's true because it fits the Constitution. It fits the way we've always done it. Yeah, that's great. Good way to add to that. Yeah, the second one, reason and experience. I'm trying to think of like what maybe an archetype of that would be. I was just thinking, that's the one that I put at the top of my stack. So I was like a suburban white dad. It's just the classic image that comes to mind for that.
Yeah, like so you're that archetype would not be so consumed or concerned with the scientific method of being able to prove something correct.
Right. Right. They would lean more on, well, here's what's worked for me in the past, or here's what I found to be true based on previous experience. And it makes sense logically. It seems like an a priori statement. So yeah, that's all I need.
Yeah. Like all Teslas are electric vehicles. And you're like, yeah, that's reason. It sounds reasonable, logical. In my experiences, I've never heard or seen of anything else that Tesla's made that's a combustion engine.
Exactly. Yeah. That's good enough for me. Yeah, and then an intuitionist experience of mysticism. So an archetype, kind of extreme version would be maybe a hippie. It's such a dated term anymore, but but somebody that dresses and flows and moves in a certain way, like what you said with tarot cards and crystals and astrology, and doesn't have to necessarily be that. That they have all those external trappings. That's again the sort of the extreme version.
A new term for hippie would be like crunchy.
Yeah, crunchy person, sure. And so it's not only that they don't necessarily rely on the scientific method or scripture or tradition. Some of these other ones, the person like that would think that their mysticism and experience is a superior way to interpret truth.
Yeah.
And then for the last one, empiricism, reason, and scientific method. I mean, that's just your classic, nerdy science person.
Scientist.
Yeah, that talks with a nasally voice and corrects you and pushes up their glasses every time you say, actually, just doesn't mean that a person has to have that persona in order to feel that this is the way to approach truth. It's just, that'd be the extreme.
Yeah.
Of it.
Yeah.
So I said mine was innateism, and reason experience was kind of the top way that I interact with truth. Is there one of these that feels or seems or more true to you?
Oh man,
or more not true, because that's not what we're going for here, but
that I resonate with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, say the first one again.
Authoritarianism.
Okay, and then
the appeal to
the second one is reason and experience. I don't know. Yeah, probably the second one and the fourth one. Trying to think of some different situations or thoughts or truths that I would use one of those ones more than the other. Probably as I've gotten older, more of the four. And I do wear glasses too. So, but yeah, probably as I've gotten older, more the four, and previously and earlier had been two, I would say.
Okay. Would you say then, if empiricism is maybe your top way of interacting with what is true, would innateism be the second one, the one that you said you've sort of grown out of or left behind, or it's not as prevalent as it would have been in your previous? Or would you say authoritative? That's I don't know. Word. Would you the first one?
The first one? No, I don't see the the first one, maybe just up until I was 18 or something like that.
Yeah.
But as far as my adult life, I would say probably transition from one to then two, which is the reason and experience. Innateism. And then and then probably as I deconstructed it, probably went more to four, which is reason and scientific method.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the intuitionist, which is experience, and mysticism would probably be near the bottom of the list as far as how you would define truth or determine truth for
The
yourself.
third one? Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so obviously if you're trying to have a discussion about truth with somebody who that's their top way of interpreting it, it's going to be
Difficult to get on the same page.
Yeah. Especially if one or both of you hasn't acknowledged that that's what's happening,
Right.
which can change it completely if you're able to acknowledge that or even have that conversation about the conversation.
Yeah. And I think that's very mature of people if you can have two people that both identify that, because then it can just be a non-starter to just not even have the conversation, because
Right.
there's not going to be any value that's been created from coming from those, especially if they're two distinct or quite on the ends of the spectrum from each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of them have a little more overlap than others, obviously. Yeah. So that's what kind of happens with my wife and I now, that our tops happen to be similar on innateism, which is reason and experience, and she's intuition, which is experience and mysticism. So there's things that she knows to be true in her body and in her soul and in her spirit that I'm like, well, it doesn't really line up with the reason for me. We can both have had that experience, but she's willing to call it true in ways that I can't relate to, and vice versa. And I might say, well, this is true because of this, and I'll give her a logical explanation. She's like, yeah, I'm not impressed, because the reason isn't as important to her as that. So we do have the overlap of the experience, and it's been a helpful tool to just be able to call that out when that's happening, or when we're seeing things differently or telling ourselves a different story.
Yeah, especially if you're going through the same experience, but
Right.
using the other portion of that, the reason and then the mysticism
Right.
portion of it. Whereas you could go through an experience of, especially in marriage, together, and then 5 years later, and then be like, what? No, we've already done, that's already happened, or this is, but then you're kind of missing each other still,
Right.
because you have that other key little aspect that
Absolutely.
shaped to show you if it was true or not.
How you interpreted it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the filter. Yeah, another thing I think where probably the thing that's at the bottom for me now, which again was different when I was younger, would be the authoritarianism. Maybe just as a reaction to pendulum swing or something. So the appeal to scripture or holy texts or written documents like the Constitution and tradition would be near the bottom for me for determining truth. Not irrelevant and not wrong, just I prioritize other approaches over that. And sometimes for her, she's a little bit more likely to put some weight on those aspects of verifying truth. And so she can kind of put that stamp on it as, okay, this is true because I read it in a book, I watched a documentary, somebody that I respect that has a certain degree and authority says this to be true, and I've heard it from multiple places from lots of PhDs with a similar degree, so therefore it's true. And I tend to still be a little more skeptical about that, to not just say, okay, that's enough for me, whereas she can. And so that's another place where we would differ. But it's helpful for me to not just be like, well, you're dumb because you believe smart people, which was maybe my unexamined reaction might be.
How would you define that? How can you have reason? So yours is, you feel connected to the second one. How would you say that you're able to even form reason outside of experience, or do you only have the reason because of the experiences that you've had that has then created that just to be a fundamental component?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that's something that philosophers have wrestled with for centuries. Yeah, it almost goes back to a version of the nature and nurture debate.
And so there's some maybe reasoning, logical reasoning perspectives that you have not experienced.
Yeah. I think we get, like, everybody gets pre-programmed with a certain amount of reason or a certain approach to reason, and then that's the nature, and then the nurture is what do we experience as a child, as a young adult, as an adult, that then informs that reason one way or another, or shapes it, cooks it or doesn't cook it, forms it or doesn't form it. And then so we combine the two, or at least those of us who prioritize this way of approaching truth might combine the two, and it's sometimes hard to see the difference. So I would summarize that as just, I've got a feeling in my gut, and my head and my heart are both in agreement about this thing being true or not true. And that's enough for me. Like I'm most of the time, not always, I'm satisfied with that, or I'm going to use that as a launching off point. I might, a little bit like with the January 6th discussion that we had, for me personally, I've got a sense, I heard a few whisperings, or just a little bit this and that, and I drew some conclusions based on my experience and my reason. And I could have stopped there, and I did for a while. And then I also said, okay, I'm going to use that as a jumping off point, and now I'm going to do some scientific method research, or consult some other sources, or look deeper, pull back the lid a little bit and see what else was going on.
And you didn't have the experience part because you weren't there.
Right.
January 6th.
Right. So I relied on my experience of other times that I'd heard reports about things that I also wasn't at personally, and what the conclusion ended up being after enough time had passed, and then applied those experiences to this experience. So even though I wasn't personally there, it's the third hand or fourth hand distance that I had from it. I still went back and said, well, every time I've seen this happen in the past, this has been the outcome, so this is probably a similar thing. Which again kind of goes back to like what I said in that conversation about why I don't follow the news as well as I used to, and not invested into political drama as I used to, because time and time again, there was always lots of hand wringing, lots of threatening, lots of existential crisis, and then it just never ended up being nearly as bad as everybody made it out to be. So I just said my experience has taught me, don't get caught up in it, because it's always going to come to basically nothing. And so that eventually informed how I behaved, how I interacted with the drama of the constant news cycle that is there to essentially incite fear and panic and doomsday prognostications. And I bought into it for so long, and eventually I was just like, okay, I'm done. So that's how experience for me factored in. And then the reason part is like, well, yeah, it makes sense. Of course they want us to stay engaged. Of course it makes money. It's part of the profit motive. If they can keep us stimulated and agitated, then we're going to, it's going to equal eyeballs, which equal advertisers, which keeps the whole thing going. So I think that's where what I would say the reason and the experience went together for me to come to the conclusion that this is a fruitless endeavor for me to participate in.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's like could be a whole nother story all by itself. Just the fact that we only have two options for news. One that's a capitalistic approach where they're motivated by just getting views, or then state funded media,
Right.
It's like there's not a better situation where there's motivation from journalists to give us true, accurate, non-flashy news, because they are motivated by money. So it's difficult. Anyways, that's
it is
topic for another story, but
we could just start an agendaless news outlet.
Right.
You and me.
Yeah. Because we have all the time for that.
We do. And all the answers. Yeah.
So do you think most people ebb and flow in and out of all four of those, depending on what the subject is they're looking at? Or do you think they primarily go to one or two?
Well, so to answer that, I'm going to appeal to my experience and reason. I'd guess the second. Yeah, probably the top two get 90 to 95% of the play. And then whatever's your third and your fourth, you don't show up very much at all, or they have just a very, very tertiary impact on how you arrive at conclusions. And you might feel like you're almost there. And then for me, being, that written text and tradition are very low, I might almost be convinced of something being true. And then I find out that that's the way it's been done for 2,000 years. And that's the final, maybe brick in the wall. That's like, okay, got it.
Man, talking about news outlets, if you were the type of person that naturally navigated towards number one as being what you naturally went to, and you only viewed one news source,
right?
That would be king. Like,
right.
You can kind of see politically, especially in our country, the U.S., like there is definitely some distinct sides, and there's definitely a good amount of people that only view one news station or a website. And that's just, if they're coming from the view of number one, that's authority. It is what it is. Like, it's
what else
absolute
do you need?
Truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no reason to go do anything else or verify or anything like that. So then you have that person having a conversation with somebody else who has not only just a differing opinion about that political subject, but it's coming from say number four,
right?
And scientific reason and all of that. Again, it would be a non-starter of a conversation, and if they didn't identify that on the front side.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because an authoritarianism person would even be willing to subjugate their own experience to the authority that they have decided to follow.
Yeah. Or even experiences of, their experiences of even hearing about maybe a potential candidate of what they've done in the past or what they've said about women in the past or something like that, where it's just not, it's not important to them to be able to view if this is the right person or not. And what they're saying is true.
Or I'm thinking about stories about the oppression of underserved or minority groups in our country, whether it's based on skin color or sexual orientation or anything like that. For me, it's very difficult to feel any kind of impact on stories, regardless of how accurate they may be, technically accurate they might be, if I haven't experienced that myself by somebody I love or watching it happen. And a lot of times, a lot of us are in a bubble where we don't experience things that are happening in bigger cities or other parts of the country. And so for me, it can be hard to not say it's true or not, but just getting a traction around.
For it to be a priority.
Right.
Yeah.
But if I know somebody that is part of that group and I've heard their experience or listened to their story or watched it happen to them, now it just boom, shoots to the top.
Yeah.
Like, I can empathize, I can relate, it matters.
Oh, I wonder if like that right there was a reasoning behind, like, say, some of the George Floyd reactions, because right there is like on video of that oppression. And so then people maybe that haven't had that experience because of where they live to then see, oh yeah, I've been hearing that there's this oppression of this thing. And then I just had the experience because I literally saw the unfiltered version of them dying right there.
You can't dispute that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless your authority tells you that it was a doctor deepfake video or something like that. Extreme. I didn't hear that happen.
No. Yeah. I would just say that unequivocally or undeniably that incident created a lot of emotion and conversation out of that. And I'm wondering, like, oh, well, has happened before. And
that wasn't the first time.
Right. It wasn't the first time, and potentially has happened a lot.
Right.
But it not only was national news for just news medias, but because of the age we are with TikTok and Twitter and all of the other things, it was much more in people's faces of their personal experiences. So it seems like
100%.
Those people that then rely on that being a truth for them.
Which, to what I was just saying a minute ago, is a perfect example of that, because it's, for me, in my story of understanding police brutality and what it's like to be a person of color in America, especially in places where police brutality is more common. I can't relate to that. And I can hear the stories and I can empathize as much as I'm able, but there's still a level of, keep using the same word, but being in that solidarity, there's a level of solidarity that I just can't quite achieve when it's detached like that. However, with George Floyd and the ensuing protests, and then the counter protest in some places, like our sleepy little town, it actually touched. And there was, in our downtown area, there was a protest and a counter protest and a lot of hostility and tensions, and things were coming to a head. And I wasn't directly involved, but I felt it in a way that I never had before. And it touched at a deeper level of experience, and it got into my soul in a way that it couldn't just by hearing the articles or even watching the video. And I was grateful for it. It wasn't a fun feeling. Wasn't something I would have chose to have until I had it. And I was like, okay, gosh, now I get it at another level. Still not as deep as the people who experience it. Still not as deep as people of color who live with that threat. I don't mean to say I understand how that feels. I'm just saying that for me and my white body, that I got a lot closer because of the fact that people reacted in the ways that they did. And then the way that it forced other people to come out and show their counter protests in the ways that they did. And that all lent itself to not just being a news story that happened somewhere else, but a thing that touches all of us in a different way.
Yeah.
So it made it more real in a way that just no amount of seeing it on TV could change.
Yeah. Even just you experiencing other people's reaction to it. Yeah. Not just the actual act of him dying, but other people's reaction then was shaped your experiences on that. Yeah.
That was real for me.
Yeah.
Did we get it covered?
Well, that was a lot. Yeah. No, that's good.
Okay.
I think that's useful information. I'm feel like it's another tool in my tool belt when I go and have a conversation. Just kind of be thinking back to the four things of I think not even just when I'm face to face with somebody talking, but even watching a video on TikTok or Reels or YouTube or something like that to see what somebody's saying about some truth or statement or where they're coming from as far as an opinion or whatever. Just kind of help identify myself, where I coming from that, and then where they're coming from with those, get a little bit better of an idea. Yeah.
I've used that as well to decide if I'm going to interact with usually a stranger, like you're saying, over social media or something. And I could tell if they're playing a certain game. That's another way to say it. They're playing a game of approaching truth from one of these four. And if I can identify that, and I can say, do I want to play that game right now? Or does that feel like it wouldn't be helpful or useful or beneficial, or is it just how I want to spend my time or not?
Yeah. And it's fascinating to think about too, that for someone to have their mind changed on a subject or a topic with hearing it from somebody else that is not speaking the same number, they would have to intentionally be open to changing, like, being open, because it's like, if it's the fourth one, reason and scientific, and they're saying, this is true. And then somebody else comes from that perspective of number four and then can show them, here's the scientific data or whatever. That's really easy.
Right.
But for someone to come from number three, the what is it called?
Intuitive.
Intuitive. Mystic in experiences, They'd have to really be vulnerable and open and willing to learn and change their mind from hearing the other person's view and perspective on that subject.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the way I've seen it play out for my wife and I is it's helped me to be able to see the difference and see that she has, if she's maybe appealing to mysticism, kind of a blend of mysticism and experience and some authoritarianism, because she's watched some videos from people that are trained in a certain area, know some things, or read a book by a PhD on the subject who spent 20 years researching it. And so she says, I believe this to be true. And even if I don't feel like it's been satisfied to me to be true, I can validate that in her and be like, okay, she believes it's true, and I can believe that she believes it's true. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily have to agree to the same level or have the same level of conviction. And I also don't need to try to talk her out of it or convince her that she doesn't have enough evidence yet, or, well, what about this? What about that? Because I understand that from her filter, her lens, what makes sense to her, what satisfies her need to know something is true, it's been met. The bar has been met.
Yeah.
And I don't have to on everything. Obviously there's some things that it's important to really drill down with when you're sharing your life with somebody, but some topics that you can just be like, great, I'm glad that you believe that. And that's true to you.
It's almost like a collaborative agree to disagree.
Exactly.
It's not like a vindictive agree to disagree or, where you're still harboring something.
Right.
It's collaborative of kind of going, we may never get on the same page with this, and I'm not right or wrong, and you're maybe not right or wrong. That's true for you, and you're coming from this perspective, and I can understand why you're coming from that and seeing that, and then you can do the same thing.
Yeah. I can truly believe that for somebody who interprets truth the way that you do, I can see how you can see that this would be true. Yeah. And that's fine. Yeah. And that's great. That's all we need to go. We can move on with our lives.
Yeah. Well, and then I think too, it would seem like that would really help in compromising in situations where you're compromising, because compromising can often feel like you're losing or you're letting go and you're giving something up for it. Whereas you could come from it from a compromising mindset of going, okay, let's figure out how to solve this barrier, this decision that we need to make or that we think is okay, and making that based on being collaborative from knowing where the other person's coming from, why they're coming from that spot for it. Not just because I think you can still without this thought process, you still can compromise, but still in the back of your head being like, oh my gosh, I don't know what they're thinking. Like that's they're not, that's or they're wrong. Yeah. But it's not going to be the fight that I want to deal with today or something, I'm going to die on that hill or something and still leave it as an unopened tab or an open tab, I should say. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's good. I like it. Awesome. Right. Thanks for bringing all that. Yeah, sure. Again, thanks to my friend Jeff R. for giving us those 4 different ways to break it down. And I guess we'll say until next time, huh? Until next time.